season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Hello and welcome to the Vancouver International Boat Show virtual seminar series, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales, the premier choice for exploring the passion of yachting. Thank you for joining us. The seminar will begin in a moment. If you are having technical difficulties, you can reach me, the online moderator, via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions for the speakers can be added in the Q&A box, also at the bottom of your screen. They will be answered after this video presentation. So it is our pleasure to present tips and traps cruising the West Coast, Mexico and the South Pacific with Will and Sarah. Over to you, Will and Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Curry. This is Will Curry, and our presentation was pre-recorded a couple of weeks ago, and we actually haven't seen it yet either. We were down in Mexico at the time, and we're actually back in Vancouver now, so we hope you enjoy it, and we'll be watching too. Thanks so much. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Curry. This is my husband Will, and we're here in Paradise Village Marina, which is in Nueva Vallarta, Banderas Bay, Mexico. And we're recording tips and traps for cruising the West Coast, Mexico, and the South Pacific. So let's get to it. I've got a PowerPoint here, so I'm just gonna share it with you and make us a little bit bigger for the duration of the show. Whoops, not that. Full screen, there we go. Okay, hopefully that's our only technical difficulty here. Awesome. All right, so throughout this presentation, we have our little friendly dolphin for all our tips. And honestly, dolphins, it never gets old. Mm-hmm. And for traps, this is, I chose this photo. This is actually the day we made landfall in the Marquesas. So I call him Captain Crazy at that point, the little anchors. A tiny bit about us just before we get started. Will has cruised up and down the West Coast from the Pacific Northwest down to Mexico about 4 times. We've sailed in Mexico in our previous boat, and we're currently here again. Will's done a side trip to the Galapagos, out to Hawaii and back, and we sailed together from Mexico, which is where we bought our first boat, all the way to Australia when we sold it. So we've been around a little bit.
All in the Pacific.
All in the Pacific, yes.
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is kind of our wish list for boat number 1 and boat number 2. Most of those points are pretty self-explanatory. The interesting one was that on the first boat, we didn't want a production boat. Mm-hmm. And what did we end up with? A production boat. And it actually ended up being really great for a number of reasons, and one of them being the resale value when we sold it in Australia. And then on the second boat, one of the highest, most important things for us was having a large cockpit, because when you're in the tropics, you live in the cockpit. And we were totally okay with production boats, and not specifically one brand or model, just in general.
Although we were specifically looking for a Jeanneau 43.
Yeah.
So our first boat was a Beneteau First 405.
Yeah, and so this is a good comparison between the two boats. So the older IORish design on the Beneteau First with the narrower entry on both ends, and then the newer design that's got a wider beam and a big bum. So we get more cabins and still the same number of heads. This is actually sailing on HydroQuest in Fiji, and that island in the background is actually where they filmed Tom Hanks' movie Castaway.
I love that photo, as if that's how you actually cruise.
This is how it's always like. And one of the things that actually was we were quite worried about when we bought the first boat was having the traveler in the cockpit. And this is a good example of how you kind of just learn to make certain things work, because you're never going to find the perfect boat. We just got used to keeping a good preventer on it. We also kept a boom brake on the boom, so we doubled up on everything, and we were just conscious of it, and it actually didn't end up being that big a deal, and it was great for sail control.
But for the second boat, a large cockpit was like really at the top of the list. So under there it says leaving the Pacific Northwest, and this may be one of the hardest things that you do. As we all know, the cruising up there is spectacular and beautiful, but the season's short, and she will always be there. There are other places to explore. For us, one of our tips, and this is kind of what we learned on our second time around, was making like a very visual to-do list. So we got this board at Walmart and we started, you know, writing down our list, and even some really small things, because it just feels great when you tick something off. So this was just our list. We'd already had our boat Marquesas, the Jeanneau 43, for a couple of years, 2 years,
so.
Cruising locally for us. But we knew we actually wanted to turn her into an offshore cruiser. So here's what the list looks like when you zoom in.
Yeah, so you can see number 21 there, replace mast. That was a small project. Yeah, no, that was pretty insane. We were literally ready to go. The boat was provisioned. Sarah had everything set up, and I got a call from our riggers because we did a last minute rig inspection just to make sure everything was good. And long story short, they went up the mast, sent a photo to the manufacturer of the base of the mast that had a bulge in it. And sure enough, what had happened over the winter, we had a really cold winter. It's a deck set mast, water filled up, the whole drain hole got plugged, water filled up to the in-mast furler, and it expanded and basically compromised the mast. So we had to replace it. And I can tell you that was not a fun phone call to get off and tell Sarah that we need to replace the rig. And by the way, it's going to be 7 to 8 months before we can get a new rig.
So the happy ending to this story is that we got so incredibly lucky. King Neptune was looking down on us, and you know, the first quote was 6 months to get a new mast from France, and then the phone rang back like an hour later, and it was our rigger,
Yeah.
and
he essentially was like, "You're not going to believe this, but we actually have a spec'd Jeanneau 43 mast in stock in the manufacturers. It was rejected because of anodizing blemishes." And he's like, "Do you want it?" And I said, "Of course I want it. Get it on that truck." And there happened to be a truck coming right to our marina, so we jumped on it. I think within all said and done, we were delayed 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And of course, you do various upgrades as well at the same time. So there's the two masts.
It was a crazy time when you're preparing to go, and then, you know, I guess the point is that things can still go wrong. So this was our departure day.
And the tip for that story is to always make sure you check your insurance policy, because we actually got coverage, damage caused by freezing, but not all policies have that. So check the fine print.
And the boat is never 100% ready, although, you know, we were still waiting on something here.
The headless horseman.
So the Washington-Oregon coast, this is rounding Cape Flattery in mid-August 2017. And this is what it looked like about an hour later. So it is a foggy coast. The first thing you really have to think about is getting out the Strait of Juan de Fuca.
Yeah, and the best thing, the best tactic really is, it's pretty rare that you're going to find a tailwind going out Strait of Juan de Fuca, especially in the late summer, early fall. So we were just timing it to look for calm conditions and a strong ebb, and that's exactly what we got. And we basically got whisked out to Cape Flattery on a magic carpet, and away we went.
Yeah, 10 knots. And we know a lot of people who've said, "Oh my gosh, that was the worst part of my whole trip," because they get caught out in wind on current. So it's just not a good way to start. So if you have to motor, so be it. We rounded Cape Flattery and we were sailing right away. And for us, you know, there had been some discussion. Do we do kind of like the one long haul and headway offshore, or do we just kind of go south? And we definitely subscribe to the don't bother adding all those miles to go way offshore. Just turn left and down you go.
Yeah, when you get around Cape Flattery, you can basically head due south, and the land contours east. So you end up naturally being, you know, sort of 20 to 30 miles offshore, and you can angle a bit further out to get clear of the crab traps.
So when you also, this was a good thing, we were looking at all of the different ports that you could actually potentially stop at going down. And the ones that are crossed out are those that are bar crossings. And to be honest, we weren't that interested in going over any bar crossings. So the one that really stood out was Crescent City, which is the very, very north tip of California. It's right on the border of Oregon and California. And we also chose that. Oh, this is just another little tip. You can start looking ahead of time of what restricts the bar crossings down that coast, what weather, what swell, and you can check out that link. It is interesting. But for us, so you can generally get a pretty accurate 3-day weather forecast. You know really what you're going to get. So we waited knowing that we were going to have good wind for 3 days. Then a southerly gale was going to blow through, completely forecast. We had by that time made it to Crescent City in our first little leg, waited out the southerly gale, and then continued for the next two nights to get down to San Francisco. So it was a really well planned trip, and I think it worked out really, really well with that tactic.
Yeah. It was a prime example because there was another boat that left at the same time. They went way offshore. They were 150 miles out. We pulled in, had a nice dinner, a couple of days. They arrived in San Francisco at the exact same time as us. They got hammered by 40-knot winds. It was a terrible trip. Yeah. And they ended up tacking on an extra 300 miles getting out that far.
And we got to see the Redwood Forest in Crescent City, which was super cool. Another thing we just say is start watching the trends. Like even if you're not planning to go this summer, start looking in July, August, September, and kind of see what a good weather would look like to you. Make sure you're checking that swell forecast as well, and know that even if you're, you know, a comfortable sailor in 20 knots plus in our calm protected waters in the Pacific Northwest, know that that's pretty boisterous offshore.
Yeah, and usually you can add 5 knots.
And
you, 15 and 20, it's 20 to 25.
Yeah, that's kind of an average. So look at the gusts as well. It's normally a lot more.
The pole, this is an interesting one because so many people in the Pacific Northwest don't use poles because we don't need to. We don't have ocean swell to contend with. It's really important when you're in ocean swell to keep the sails stabilized so they're not sliding all over the place, and also making sure that your sails are well shaped to be rigged on a pole. This was our Genoa before we had it recut to go on the pole. And you can see it's got a fairly low clew. It's a deck sweeping sail. It was like a 120 or a 130, so it had too much sail area. And then the other thing you can see on this, we actually have the pole on a track on the mast, so it makes it much easier to deploy. You're not up there trying to deal with a long pole, kind of getting it in the clam cleat and then trying to rig everything up. So just make it as easy as possible.
And practice, because you don't want to just be testing out this whole system, you know, when you round Cape Flattery. You want to know who's doing what job and how it all works. And when you get it, it's so easy, and you'll probably use the pole like 90% of your cruising.
Yeah, so we ended up cutting the Genoa down to a 110 with a high cut clew, and it's magic for downwind sailing. It's perfect.
Avoid the fatigue. Oh my goodness, do not underestimate this danger, especially if it's your first overnight passage. Make sure you start those darkness watch schedules right away, even if everyone's excited to be out there. The nice thing is in the summertime, there's less dark hours. We do meet people again who say, oh, you know, my husband's doing the night watch and I'm up during the day, but I think that's just a very unsafe way to do it. So if you don't think you're going to be able to, you know, do 3 or 4 hour watches, bring along some crew to help. Crab pots are out there. Oh yes.
Especially in August.
Especially in August. So we met I think he's a fishing boat captain when we were in Crescent City, and he just said, you know, as long as you're 500 feet deep, they're generally not setting in that depth. And normally that is like 30, 40 miles offshore. And after September, when they bring them all in, there are fewer. Fog gear, radar, you're going to be running it. It's a battery drainer. AIS as well, it's amazing. The fishing boats that are out there are not required to transmit on AIS, so that's why you also need to be running your radar through the night.
90% of fishing boats, even the big ones, were not pinging a signal.
No.
Which was quite startling.
No, and you know, we were in such fog that you couldn't even see the bow of the boat, so you couldn't rely on seeing lights out there. You know, radar was what we were kind of glued to. And A sleeping bag, for sure. It's a little bit chilly. And we use Dawn dishwashing liquid actually on our full enclosure just because it gets really fogged up, and that helped. And just to kind of remove some condensation so you can actually see out the windows. We arrived in San Francisco and there was a weather warning and it was a heat wave, so it wasn't so bad after all.
Yacht club memberships. Even if you're not a member of a yacht club, join one. You can find ones that are relatively inexpensive. Getting the reciprocal privileges at all the clubs was pretty amazing. Not only do you get club facilities, but you meet a lot of club members, and so many of them were just open arms and wanting to help and take my car, go get groceries, go do this. I can't tell you how much that actually enhanced and enriched our experience for going down the coast. Everywhere we went, there was a yacht club that we could pretty much pull into and utilize.
Yeah, and we had our boat in San Francisco for 8 months, and we did spend some of that time like cruising around in the bay, and there aren't very many anchorages, to be honest. So you really are hopping from yacht club to see the different areas.
Mm-hmm. That's the Golden Gate Yacht Club that we're just at.
A lot of people skip this entire kind of middle coast and just go straight from San Fran down to Santa Barbara. And we spent almost a month just stopping at every place along the way. And you actually don't even have to do an overnight sail. So if you have the time, this is probably one of my favorite stretches of California.
For sure.
We added our first child while we were in California. There's our dog Salty. And soon after, or not so soon after, number 2 and 3 quickly followed. So these are our twins, Hugo and Kip, and they were born while our boat was waiting patiently for us in San Diego.
Jimmy Cornell was very proud of this photo.
Now, if you ever want to complain about doing boat projects again, try doing with 2, I think they were like 5 months old or 4 months old at the time, 2 little babies on board. It is insane.
Chaos.
But,
absolute chaos.
But we were really, really motivated to get KaiQuest down to Mexico prior to the boys being mobile, more mobile. So we missed the Haha in 2019, which we had wanted to do. And instead it turned into February by the time we were actually ready to head down the coast. But I think that's a really good point. You can actually go down the outside of the Baja, pretty much any time, so long as it's not hurricane season. Some of the things we did were rig up, a lee cloth and all of these things to get the boat ready for Mexico. Mexico, a huge trap is either going too fast, planning to just breeze through and cross to the South Pacific in one season, or going too slow, which is getting there and spending 20 years. And both work, but it sure is nice to have, a couple seasons at least.
You have to be careful though, the Mexican vortex,
Yeah.
because you can arrive and you may never leave. And it's nice, but there's a lot of other great places to see as well.
So here we are, we're back in Mexico. We're really ecstatic to be here. And these are our little boys now who are about 1.5 years old, and they're napping at the moment right over here. So we're really hoping they don't wake up. Okay, there was a cough. Another trap for Mexico is that you need everything. To be honest, you can get really great work done. You can get, canvas work, bimini work, stainless work. Importing parts is a little more difficult, but otherwise, lots that can be done. Get used to the surf landings on the Pacific coast for sure. The dinghy is really important. So having the right dinghy with a big flared bow, having dinghy wheels that are easy to deploy, these just make life so much easier. We love, if you Google Blue Latitude Press and Sean and Heather, they've done cruising books for both the Sea of Cortez and Pacific Mexico, and they're just awesome guides for cruising down here. This is just a couple months ago in the Sea of Cortez, so water was 29 degrees Celsius, whatever that is Fahrenheit. The La Paz Waltz, so you may have heard of this already, and this is one of the interesting things about La Paz when you're anchored out, and there can be a very strong wind blowing, and yet there is also a lot of tidal action, and often they oppose each other. So your anchor can kind of, be doing a twirly whirl, and the boats all move a little bit differently, and it's not a synchronized dance. So It's pretty interesting.
It's a weird feeling to have it blowing 20 to 25 knots and your stern is to the wind.
So we did have an experience there on our last boat, and we were ashore and looked out, and she was gone.
Yeah. I went out and just to check on her, and the mast was gone. And I thought, yeah, this is weird. And sure enough, the boat had actually drifted, you know, 1.5 miles all the way down the channel. And I thought for sure it was aground. Luckily, we got out there. Some guy in a dinghy gave me a ride that happened to be pulling up, and got the anchor up, and we were literally like 15 feet away from this big sandbank. And when I got the anchor up, it was like a Christmas tree. The chain had just wrapped around the fluke of the anchor, and we should have been re-anchoring more regularly. So
Yeah, and
lesson learned.
And listen to your wife, because I knew something is wrong that morning that we left the boat. Long lines, so back to the Pacific coast of Mexico, these are a thing. If you see a Coke bottle floating in the water, take a careful look, because there may be, you can see a line there, another one floating a little bit further away, and they're connected by lines in the water, and they're a fishing method. So you just have to be cautious so you don't wrap your
It's
prop.
apparently illegal, and they're not supposed to be doing it, but we haven't seen any this time around.
We
so
just
I'm wondering if they've cracked down on it.
We saw a lot when we were cruising here like 7-8 years ago, but we just came down from Mazatlan like a few weeks ago, and we didn't actually see any. So hopefully it's not such a thing anymore. Stern anchor on the Pacific coast, absolutely. If you think you need it, put it out before you wake up. Beam to the wind. And if you plan to leave your boat in Mexico, definitely a 1 week minimum. And I think for us, we're going to double that now just with the twins. So 2 weeks to get the boat to bed and 2 weeks to recommission. You can pause and take a look at some of the things on our list here. And this was actually for when we were leaving the boat on the hard in La Paz one season. We've since left the boat in the water in La Paz, which and we'll probably leave the boat in the water in Paradise Village, Nueva Vallarta this season, just because it's a little bit easier for us.
I think that leaving it in the water is probably a little bit more beneficial, just because the water at least cools down a bit. When the boat's on the hard, it gets really, really hot and everything gets dried out. So
there's differing opinions for sure.
Who knows what the right tactic is, but that's what we lean towards.
Hurricane season and the summer months, so many places that you can actually leave your boat. Puerto Penasco is probably the only one that's actually not going to get hit by a hurricane, but we're lucky we do have a hurricane rider on our insurance policy, so we're just going to take the risk, and we're pretty comfortable doing it to leave it somewhere a little bit further south. Now, when we were cruising Mexico last time, a lot of what we were actually doing was preparing for the Pacific puddle jump. And we jumped from Banderas Bay, actually, pretty much from where we are right now, back in 2013. And Banderas Bay is a great place because you've got a big Costco, you've got a Mega, you've got tons of stores and, marine chandleries. So it was a really great place to actually provision and get ready.
For sure. And you can see on the right there, so in our previous boat, we had a very small fuel tank, 35 gallons.
Yeah.
I was a little concerned for a 3,000 mile crossing having so little. So we bought these old oil jugs and filled them up with diesel. And the amazing thing is, we actually, when we arrived in the Marquesas, we still had all that fuel. We used some in the tank, obviously, but not those stuff that was in the jerry cans. So, once you're in the trades, they're pretty consistent, and it's also a testament to a boat that can sail well in light airs.
Yeah, that's totally true. So we got our Zarpe, which at the time was the exit paper for Mexico, and we had Will's brother Ben and his now wife Katie join us for the long leg. And now we'll get into the South Pacific.
That doesn't look very nice.
No. So I've broken it down into 10 legs, and anything that includes an overnight is considered a leg. So you can take a look at that in a little more detail. And in terms of a guidebook, now we really enjoyed, and I just double checked that they're still updating it, but if you Google Soggy Paws and their compendiums, this is a boat that's been out there for a while, and they actually just gather information from people going to islands in the South Pacific, and they put it into PDF, and it's really great because it's kind of up to date, it's personal experience. So we just had that on the iPad, and it was great reading. when
Seasickness mitigation, I think, is something that is really important. I actually get a little bit seasick. I think we all do at some point. Some of the rules for us that work really well is the main number one thing is go to an anchorage with a bit of roll to it and get sort of gently acclimatized. If you're going from a flat marina straight out to sea, it's a hard transition. The other thing that works well is, you know, making sure that you don't have any acidic food or coffee the morning you leave, and then try and limit alcohol the night before. And of course, we broke that rule because we were just so excited for finally doing the big jump.
Yeah, this photo always cracks me up because we were anchored out at Punta Mita, and you know, we were having a couple of last pina coladas, and we all look a little bit crazy because you're like, oh my gosh, we're leaving in the morning on this long passage. What is it gonna be like?
Top gear. So this was on the prior boat. I would say our sat phone is, you know, obviously an emergency tool, but also just the ability to download weather and emails. AAS was a bit newer back then, and now I think it's pretty much commonplace, but having the transceiver where you're sending a signal and you can receive is really nice. And our hydrovane for basically steering us 90% of the way across the Pacific. A pretty awesome thing to be steered by the wind, not have that power demand, not be reliant on generating power from multiple sources, and then having the emergency rudder as well is very comforting, especially for thin keel boats with spade rudders. You're a little more vulnerable if you hit something. So it was always, for me as the captain, felt very comfortable to know that if things blew up, we had a fallback plan.
Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned before, but I didn't know how to sail when we bought our first boat in late 2011. So, you know, Will was taking along pretty inexperienced crew. And I didn't even know, even though we'd been married for how long at the time, I didn't know even what a hydrovane was. And the caveat here is that it is actually our family business. So Will had been working there for a while. But it wasn't until we actually got out there and started sailing with it, and especially on this longer leg once we left, and, you know, not relying on an autopilot. And for me, when we're doing a lot of downwind sailing and being in the cockpit alone at night, knowing that when you're steering a wind-based course, there's pretty much no chance of an accidental jibe, because your boat, the course may shift a little bit if the wind does, but you don't need to be constantly, you know, trimming the sails. So
it made me sleep a lot better as well, just knowing that we weren't going to get into a crash jibe.
It steers a hell of a lot better than me. So, and there, you know, we went sailing into the sunset. When you're leaving Mexico, wait for a good departure date. We timed it to have a good connection, so a northerly wind blowing down the sea, which was the connector to get us out to the Northeast trades. And we left at the end of March, and boats were kind of leaving, had already left before us and left after us, but that was a popular time. What's out there?
Not much.
Not much. We enter what we like to call zombie state.
And here we are on day 3, or perhaps day 4 of the trip. Captain Will's been working very hard here in the old aft cabin.
Life is rough back here.
Life is rough. We've had, we'll tell them, Will, Sarah, how has the trip been?
So,
It's been good except for the rhino waves.
Oh, the fucking rhino waves.
This is how we have to sleep, like this, so that...
Rhino feet for the rhino waves.
yep.
But we think we're done with them.
The impact.
More to come from these sailors, sulky specimens. Kathleen, you're on camera. Did you do your hair?
No.
Didn't do her hair. So, what you can see out here, here's the lovely Kathleen. And Kathleen, what do we say? She just started talking yesterday. She was sick for the first 3 days. But it's been nice to have her back. There is our elusive hydrovane, still unnamed, but we're working on that. And you can see here we've got a tailing sea, kind of 10 to 15 knots. And this is actually pretty calm. It was kind of rough for the first couple of nights there. We did about 165 miles one day, and we're trucking along pretty good.
The other part of being at sea is really eating, sleeping, and passing time. You know, that's kind of what I feel like we did out there. Ate a lot of chickpea salads and pasta.
The days all blend into each other. The ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a lot of people were talking about this pre-departure, all the various boats, where's the best place to go. We kind of just sort of stayed on our rumline course, and we ended up crossing the equator at 128 west, which was much further east than a lot of the other boats. I don't know if it was luck, but we didn't have any lightning. I think we had a day of lighter winds, and then we just motored through the equator and then into the southeast trades. The nice thing about crossing further east is we had a better wind angle with the wind when we got into the southeast trades, because some of the boats that were too far west, the wind was, you know, actually forward of the beam to get to the Marquesas, so things get a little wetter, and whereas we were actually after the beam.
And you can see, I mean, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, also known as the doldrums, it's like a band of weather. So you can physically see it.
Yeah, and
And what made our equator crossing day even more special was actually that Ben proposed to Katie. So there you can see it was a huge celebration.
we were very happy that she said yes.
Yeah.
Would have been a long week after.
Still a week to go. And then we finally turned back on our chart plotter, because you don't really need it when you're out there, and saw land, which was an amazing feeling. So we were just absolutely overjoyed. I'll seriously never forget the feeling of making landfall. This absolutely beautiful group of islands. Now we came in further north, so you'll see there's a yellow arrow down there, and that is a lot of the boats coming from the Galapagos who are kind of starting a bit further south. They come in and they make landfall in Hiva-Oa. We came in and we actually made landfall in Nuku Hiva, which was great. There's a big wide open bay. It could probably fit like 200 boats. So that's kind of why we aimed for there. Whereas Hiva-Oa, from what we've heard, Tuona is a bit of a tighter anchorage.
Yeah, you
so
need a stern anchor. Some boats actually stop in Batu Hiva. And
I would say the next time we go,
necessarily check in.
The next time we go, we probably will try to get down to Hiva-Oa just so that we can check in there, because you want to check in at a port of clearance, port of entry, and then you can kind of do a little short upwind leg to get down to Fatu Hiva, which is where we would like to visit next time. And this is what a landfall looks like.
So weird.
HydroQuest on land for the first time in 20 days. And Captain Will?
Oh my god. It's concrete. Amazing.
I might as well get in on this.
And after that, we headed straight for the beer. We are a dry boat at sea, but we couldn't wait to get our hands on some of those Hananos. The Marquesas are not known for their white sand beaches, but we did a day trek over to find one. And honestly, the scenery, it's mind-blowing. It's just out of Jurassic Park. It's so beautiful. From the Marquesas, we headed off to the next group of islands that we were going to visit in French Polynesia, the Tuamotus. And the distances are not close. I mean, you're looking at, it was, I think, 460 miles to get to the next group. So this was actually one of our worst legs. It was the squalliest.
Yeah, we had, for the first 24 hours, we had nothing but squalls, some lightning, some heavy rain, far too windy. It was pretty extreme.
On the hour, every hour. So you can see on our radar there, that was the Pac-Man squall that was just trying to eat us.
Yeah, and so the Tuamotus, they all have these passes for getting into inside the fringing reef, and we were a little bit nervous because we didn't really know what to expect, and we'd heard some bad stories. It's quite hard to calculate exactly when to go through the passes. There are some online calculators for trying to figure it out. We didn't do that, and got fairly lucky. This is the South Pass in Fakarava, and you can see the size of them. And basically what you want to watch is just the size of the swell, because when there's a big swell, it's just a constant ebb that's going out each pass. But pretty cool once you're inside, flat calm water lagoon, and the water was the clearest water that I'd ever seen.
Yeah, and the soggy paws that I mentioned earlier, they actually do have a guesstimator, a current guesstimator for the passes that, you know, you just do like a mathematical calculation and hope that it helps. When we came in that day on our first one, it was a cloudy day and there are coral heads. So
Bommies, not bombs.
yeah, not bombs, but bommies are coral heads. I think it's like
It's
an
an Australian
term. And for anchoring, just to protect the coral, we at first
And your chain.
And your chain, yeah. Bring a few old fenders or go fender hunting. And sadly, we found these old fishing balls that we used on the outside of the atoll. But you want to kind of rig up your chain like that so you're protecting everything. And then you jump in and oh my, I mean, the sharks are just absolutely incredible. The underwater life, the Tuamotus are like unlike anywhere that we'd ever been before.
I think it was my brother described the sharks as the dogs of the ocean. Once we got comfortable with being in the water with so many sharks.
The new dogs, because you kind of just get used to them, and then they're just kind of cute, and they're there, and they're like puppies. But for sure, a highlight for us was the atoll of Fakarava and the South Pass beyond. From there, we hopped, or from another atoll, we hopped over to the Society Islands. This is actually photo on Moorea in Cook's Bay, very famous bay, and also amazing cruising, but definitely things are a little more expensive here. It is touristy, but it is gorgeous.
And one of the highlights for me was Chaupu, which is the one of the world-renowned big wave surf spots. You can see my form here is looking pretty good. No, it's not me. But yeah, it was pretty cool. You get a whole new appreciation for the ocean when you see the thickness of the wall of these waves and the power that they generate. It's unbelievable. This is all tow-in, so they're getting towed in on the jet skis.
And if you go to check it out, we didn't bring our own dinghy, but you can go out on a local boat and they get you so close. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I remember screaming, like our driver's name was Maurice, and I was like, Maurice, like, it's okay.
And if you look at the boats, you can see they actually sit right at the front of the boat. There's like a little joystick that they use to steer because they want to get all the weight as far forward as possible.
It was wild. It was so cool.
Yeah.
We spent, I think, about a month in the Society Island group, and the last island where we were checking out of French Polynesia was Bora Bora. We only had the 3-month visa for French Polynesia. Now, maybe not this year, but in future years, you can apply for a longer stay visa, which we will definitely do next time. So we were here, we were in Bora Bora. We'd been there for a couple of weeks. We were waiting for weather to do our next longer passage. And we weren't able, you're in a protected calm lagoon, so we weren't able to kind of integrate ourselves with life at sea. So we actually headed out into what was the biggest swell that we had sailed in. I think we had 5 meters right on the beam. It was pretty wild, and that was one of the only times that I was seasick. So this leg turned into our worst leg, from Bora Bora to the island of Nui. And we also knew that we were going to cross something called the South Pacific Convergence Zone. And we had used Bob McDavitt, who's a great weather guy. And he told us that on day 5, we're going to, hit this thing. And we sure did. We woke up to lightning. So that was really our only experience with lightning. And it wasn't that much fun.
It was pretty intense. Some of the things we do to deal with lightning, we run jumper cables off the shrouds, and we put all our electronics in the oven to act as a Faraday cage. On the current boat, we have a safe, which we'll use for putting our electronics in. Whether these things work or not, who knows, but you do what you can.
So we've never been so excited to get to the island of Nui, which was fantastic. And then after that, we had some really, really nice legs. I call them the lovely legs. From Nui to Tonga, and then from Tonga to Fiji. These were relatively easy. We're in the groove.
A good little tip. I was talking about the pole earlier. A lot of the legs that we were on, before we left, we'd kind of try and figure out what tack we'd be on, and we would rig the pole before we even left with a 4-guy and an aft guy, and then you just pull out the sail and away you go. Much easier doing that in a calm lagoon rather than out at sea rolling around.
I don't know why my clicker stopped working. Yeah. So full moon passages. This was also great. We were timing our hops now with, you know, spending a month in each spot and then doing our passages over the full moon, which was wonderful.
You know, Tonga, Tonga is probably like a tropical version of the Gulf Islands or the San Juan Islands. That's how I would describe it. All the distances are close, lots of great anchorages. If I was ever going to do a charter in the South Pacific, I'd try and get to Tonga. It's hard to get there, but well worth it.
On HydroQuest, we had 150 feet of chain, and I'd say that was kind of on the low end of what some other people were carrying, but we never needed more.
It was adequate. We made it work. But on this boat, we have 225 feet now. Yeah. And I think having that extra little bit is nice just for because there are some spots where you're anchoring in 60 plus feet. And it's nice to stay on the chain.
For the South Pacific, your dive gear, if you're a diver, or your snorkel gear otherwise, just so important. You're in the water all the time, so it's good to have the good gear. And not only just to check out the fish and the coral and all that fun stuff, but you're cleaning the bottom of the boat pretty often.
Every couple weeks.
A huge highlight for us was in Tonga and swimming with the humpback whales. We were actually able to get into the water with them for over an hour, and a mom and her calf, and it's just a completely magical experience. Really makes you appreciate.
Yeah, just to get that amount of time as well. You know, they were totally content with us being there, and we just you're just mesmerized. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. We moved on to Fiji shortly after, and Fiji to us was kind of the most comparable to Mexico, the cruising. It's relatively inexpensive once again, and the people are just above and beyond kind and nice, and there's just so many anchorages and areas that you can cruise. It's definitely on the bucket list to go there and spend a lot more time. It's kind of like the Mexico for all the Kiwis and Aussies. You know, a lot of people go back and forth.
We met a lot of them that would actually come up there season after season, or even leave their boats there. Yeah, it's definitely a good spot.
We were in quite a few small villages, and you do need a knee covering skirt. So I didn't have anything like that. So just a sarong was what I wore a lot of the time. And when you come to a village or an island near a village, you actually go ashore and you present kava to the chief. And this was a really, really, really cool experience. The multiple times that we were able to do it, drinking kava with some of the chief, or I think in this case it was actually his son. So really neat. From Fiji to Vanuatu, oh, this was interesting. So the red dot does not actually mark the line of where.
Not where we sunk.
This was actually crazy. I
was on watch, and I could see this sort of peak on the horizon, and I was like, wow, what is that? And we were gaining quite quickly on it, and sure enough, we got up to it, and I actually had to divert course because we were pretty much on a collision course with it, and it was a half submerged container, and you could tell it had been there for a long time because there was a lot of growth on the underside. But that was rather sobering to see an actual container, because as far as we know, we were the only people that year that I know that actually saw a container. So I don't think it's that common. It's just they are out there.
And we moved on to Vanuatu, and we were headed for, you can't see it, but underneath it there, it says the island of Tanna. And for a very specific reason, we had chosen to make landfall there. So a highlight, again, hidden by our faces, a highlight was Mount Yasur, and we'll show you a quick video here.
Very hard to appreciate the contour here.
So we're gonna see.
It looks like down here.
It's hard to see through the smoke. Whoa! That's what we're talking about. Look at that. Holy. Holy, look at the lava down there. That is insane.
Yes, so it is insane. You're standing on the edge of a volcano, and I watch that now and I just think, what were we doing?
It was funny because the guy who took us up there, we'd given him a Molson Canadian hat, and he was quite stoked on this hat, and it was quite windy, and they take you up there sort of at dusk so you can kind of see the red lava at night. And his hat blew off as we were walking along the edge there into the crater, and he was almost going to go down and get it. And I was like, no, don't worry. We've got another one of those for you. Just stay with us.
Yeah, he was going to jump into a volcano to save a Molson Canadian hat. So
it's pretty wild.
We talked him out of it. But as the sun went down, to be honest, I was completely terrified, but it did look cooler and cooler. From Vanuatu, we hopped 2 nights to New Caledonia, and to be honest, we didn't actually see a lot of New Caledonia. We were experiencing what we call the one season syndrome, and it was a bit of sailing burnout at that point. And we had fallen into the trap of wanting to sail across the entire South Pacific to Australia in one season. And it's a lot of miles, and you're really, really pushing. And it wasn't until New Cal that we kind of we were feeling it, but we definitely just kind of hunkered down and we were waiting for a weather window to do our last leg to get to Australia. So the last leg, New Caledonia to Coffs Harbour, Australia, and our insurance wouldn't cover us past, I think it was November 1st. Yeah. So we were on this kind of marching path, and another decent leg. I think when we do it again, we probably will opt to leave our boat in the South Pacific islands.
French Polynesia.
Probably in Tahiti for a season, maybe Naifu, where we know that there's a good place to haul out. So there's these various places that if we're doing it again, we would certainly
consider it.
The
further west you get, the more vulnerable you are.
Yeah. Australia was our 10th land ho, which was just an amazing feeling because it's what we had been working towards for so long. And we got to Coffs Harbour, which is a really neat spot to make landfall, relatively small place. One guy did our customs, immigration, and biosecurity, and it was, it was just a great experience. And from there, we spent a couple months hopping down the New South Wales coast and finally made it into Sydney Harbour, which had been a dream for so many years.
It felt really nice at that point to not have to be covering a lot of miles and just drag our heels and take our time because, yeah, we were pretty burnt out from all the ocean miles.
We were.
And another highlight for us, especially me, was the Sydney to Hobart start. And the really cool thing about this is that in Australia, even people that aren't into sailing would come out to watch the Sydney to Hobart start. So all the headlands would be lined with people and boats everywhere. And these are all the 100-foot maxis leading the pack going out. And I remember watching them go out. It was blowing from the south, 30 knots plus. And I just said, you couldn't pay me to go into that right now.
No, we were actually done with sailing for a little bit. We're just happy to be somewhere for a while, not having to cover miles. And Sydney Harbour was such a great place to cruise for a few months. Catching the fireworks on New Year's Eve was a life-changing experience. It was so cool. Yeah. There's so many boats anchored. We couldn't believe it. You're just next door. You're mere boat lengths apart. And we were flying our Canadian flag, and we actually got in the night before and secured a great spot, anchored just off the zoo. And then on the 31st, hundreds more boats joined us. And of course, chains are everywhere. And we were the boat, we knew our anchor had been set the night before, but we were the boat that, our chain got lifted. And at it dragged at 8 p.m. on New Year's Eve. We'd had a few beers, and our boat with the Canadian flag is the one dragging through this.
It was kind of ironic that we crossed the whole Pacific and never dragged once, and then here we are in Sydney Harbour.
So we had to prove our skills with a bunch of Australians heckling us while we tried to maneuver and find a spot within all these boats, but it all worked out. Yeah. A few statistics for crossing. The wind she blows in the South Pacific, no doubt. The strongest wind was in a squall, about 45 knots. We did have 20 knots most of the time in the trades, a lot of squalls, and our average speed was really good actually. HydroQuest, she sailed really well, 6.2 knots. And yeah, when I look at that, 185 nautical miles, that was pretty good for a 24-hour run.
That was a long crossing. Yeah, interesting to see the points of sail. So most of it downwind, some of it forward of the beam as we got closer to Australia. And we had either a single reef or a double reef in the main pretty much the whole way across. You know, it was a powerful boat, so we reef early, but yeah, it was very rare that we had to contend with light winds. As you can see, we only flew the spinnaker 3 times, and it took up a lot of space. So I would probably rethink that one for this boat.
We never put the third reef in,
Yeah.
and we had a storm sail, but we never had to use it. In total, from the night that we left Mexico to when we arrived in Australia, we spent 50 nights of that sailing overnight. And so it was 21%, which is, you know, quite a lot, actually. I think comfortable cruising, at least the way we like to cruise, is, you know, 10% of your time at sea. And also interesting was that as we got further west, there's actually fewer and fewer places where you can actually anchor. So you end up doing a lot of mooring balls, you know, for protecting the coral, and then places where it is too deep. And the only time that we were actually at a dock was in Papeete. We were Medmore downtown for a couple nights, and then also we were in Bunda Point Marina in Fiji as well. So
they're not docks, but you're stern too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get spoiled in the U.S. and Mexico and Canada with these nice marinas and all the facilities, because you don't really see that in the South.
Yeah, and you're not plugging in anywhere.
Engine hours, I like this one because I like to rub it into all my friends with power boats. 175 hours for 8,000 miles of sailing, $500 in fuel. It's pretty consistent. I think we probably did more than that, if not the same, just in one short season in Mexico. So you get to sail, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, you do a lot more motoring in Mexico for sure. And one thing, we knew it was going to be amazing, but the kindness, and I do have 2 S's there, the kindness of the strangers, the people that we ended up meeting was just incredible. You know, we were taken in pretty much in every country by people that we met who wanted to show us their culture, meet their families, you know, take us around, and it still sticks with us, just how amazing some of those experiences were.
Yeah, and this is such a prime example. When we were in Fakarava, our outboard died, and I went into the local dive place where there were some young guys there, and I said, you know, I'm trying to get this engine going, and they helped me diagnose it, and they came up to the boat later that day, and they said, yeah, you need these parts for your carburetor, and I've called my friend in Papeete who's going to fly them up to the north part of the island, and I've got a friend in a boat who's going to bring them down. And I kind of thought he was joking. Yeah, that's a good one. And sure enough, the next day, the parts arrived. We're in this atoll in the middle of nowhere. Not only did they arrive, he helped us reinstall the new parts. It was over $100 in parts, and he would not accept a penny. And we were just flabbergasted. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And so, of course, when we left, we got all these gifts together and basically put a bag of stuff and threw it on the dock and left so that he would actually accept something. But
they were so sweet, and it was actually
cool.
great in French Polynesia, because I have, you know, some French language skills, so that really did make a difference, I think, as well.
We had them out to the boat for dinner, and just an amazing experience.
Again, just, you know, incredible. Now, the plan for us, this didn't happen by accident. We were always planning to sell the boat in Australia. And we got there, and we were sad to do it, but we were also kind of ready to move on.
Yeah, and going back to what I said earlier, being a production boat, if you want to sell a boat in Australia, they love Beneteaus, Hansas, Bavarias, you know, all of them, Jeanneau's. It's just that market really craves that. And if you want to sell the boat quickly, you got to get the boat down to Sydney, because that's obviously where all the money is. And when we listed the boat, we had it sold within a month, and you know, it all worked out really well for us.
Yeah.
And for the first 6 months, we were quite happy being boatless. And then we thought, wait a sec, this is boring. Time for another boat.
Yeah, so our boatless
Funny how
life
that changes.
did not last very long. We think one of the traps that people do fall into, and this is life, but waiting too long to make it happen. So as soon as you think you can pull it all together, and we see people out there in all types of boats, you know, you don't have to have the perfect boat, just have the right safety gear and try to get out there.
Sounds cliche when you say make it happen, but it really is. Just do it as soon as you can, and there's never going to be the right scenario or the right time financially, but somehow you just sort of make it happen.
The dream, this is what I used to do, you know, zooming in on Google satellite images of the Tuamotus, and this here you can see Fakarava and a bunch of the other atolls that we were able to visit. So that was the dream that we had for many, many years before we were able to make it happen. And this is the reality of standing in one of those atolls.
Pretty cool.
And from there, our dream really did, you know, we were so inspired by all of the cruising families that we met out there when we were first sailing. We weren't at all ready to have a family, but once we decided that we were, it was kind of like, it has to be cruising kids, you know, they're just the coolest. Will was a cruising kid. Yeah, they're learning so much at a young age. And so this is our reality now, which is just, you know, makes me emotional. Now we're back out here.
Yeah, special for sure. So yeah, you can find us, our company website, hydrovane.com. Our emails are up there. We're on Instagram.
A little bit.
We have a blog. It's fairly dormant, but it does have all of our South Pacific stuff on there, and Sarah wrote quite a bit of detail on it. So yeah. I think some of that would be quite interesting.
Back
if you
when people were blogging.
Yeah, if you have plans to go to that. Now it's all social media, and we're not the greatest in that, but we try.
We try. So thank you all for listening. We hope you learned a thing or two, and feel free to drop us a line, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your hair looks very nice.
We're unmuted. Hi, are we unmuted?
Yes.
We are here. We hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. We did too. That was actually our first time watching it. You may have noticed there was like a little blip in there at some point around Tonga. That's where our son Hugo woke up, so we had to stop and restart. But if you have any questions, we would absolutely love to answer them now. I've been answering a few as we go, but please feel free to type them away. I see there's one here. So from Cristobal, tips for sailing with babies. Specifically, what do you do with them if the two of you are sailing the boat? Yes, this is something we have learned recently.
You're essentially single-handing your boat. That's
yeah. So I guess, okay, so here's what we did. We have like these two little pop-up chairs that we actually strapped into the cockpit. So those chairs we use, like if we're coming into a dock or we're anchoring, we would actually just kind of strap them into the chair so that they couldn't move. And then down below in the boat, which is where I spent most of the time with the boys while we were actually sailing, we rigged up an entire very, very tall lee cloth over our main salon area with the table down. So it was kind of this like padded cell almost, and we would just roll around in there. But it's more the challenge of keeping them entertained, right? I see a thank you, which is very lovely. A couple thank yous. And someone else asking if this is a recording and if you can see it again. So yes, the recording is being aired by the Vancouver Boat Show again on Friday at 5:30. And after the show, we'll probably be posting it on our website, hydrovane.com. And feel free to email me just to see when, but I am happy to share.
Question from Christian. Which yacht club did you join heading down to Mexico, and how much did it cost? So I joined the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club many years ago, and so that we obviously had that membership. But we know of friends in the Pacific Northwest that joined a club, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was like $65 to join. And it basically just gave you a card of saying that you're a yacht club member. Most of the clubs going down the coast, a lot of the sort of smaller ones, they didn't even really ask what club you're from. It was pretty laid back.
Yeah, it was an American one. It was in Puget Sound somewhere. But I would even say, like, it's just presenting something, like even the Blue Water Cruising Association, like if you join that and you have like a membership card. But in California, for sure, being a part of the yacht clubs and using them was, well, that's where we showered.
Yeah. Next question from Shelly. What size battery bank and solar do you have? So as far as solar goes, we have on the current boat 440 watts, and we have separate controllers on each panel. It seems to work out pretty well. When you get down south, your power demands do go up significantly because your refrigeration is running all the time. That you have to factor into how much solar do you get. The battery bank that we have is not big. We've got fairly basic Trojan, lead acid, 440 amp hour capacity, which means we only have 25% of that. I think that the size of the battery bank is less critical. It's more important is just getting a power management system that can support that and float it so that you're not constantly going down each day. The battery bank is just basically to float you overnight or deal with a few days of cloudy weather.
Yeah, and also we are kind of commuter cruisers, so we do leave our boat. Like we've left the boat in Mexico now and come back to Vancouver. And when we got back, so we had left the boat when COVID kind of hit last March, and we left in La Paz and we left in the water. And when we got back, the batteries, the boat had somehow, the shore power was unplugged, so the batteries were dead. So we kind of do go by the stance of like your batteries might be disposable, you know, and need replacement every once in a while. So that's why we kind of go for the easy, less expensive version. An anonymous question: how long did it take you to get over your seasickness once underway? Yeah,
3 to 5 days is sort of a rule of thumb. Definitely 3 days to sort of get in the rhythm of it all and get comfortable with it. And that can be part of the problem with coastal cruising, is you're doing 2 to 3 day hops, you're just getting over your seasickness, and then you pull into port. So in some ways, the longer passages were almost easier in that respect. But I really am a big believer of just get into a rolly anchorage or somewhere with a bit of motion before you head to sea, because that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Another question from Roger: what brand model boat could I buy that is in demand, which I can easily sell after I can buy in Vancouver or Seattle? Good question. I mean, all production boats, they all have, you know, good models. It's more just a matter of what you're looking for. Some people do like those sort of classic blue water cruisers with, you know, modified fin keels and skeg rudders. Definitely the trend, especially in Australia, is for modern boats. People like having the platforms off the back and big cockpits and lots of space down below, because livability, if you think about it, is a huge part of your life being on a boat. The sailing percentage is actually really small.
Yeah, and we certainly, when we started looking for our first boat, it's like 10 years ago now, but we were kind of subscribing to this idea that you had to have this like blue water boat. And we just felt so lucky that we landed on our Beneteau, because we really do think that it sold quickly because it was a production boat. So yeah, I mean, we love our Juneau now, there's no doubt. It's fantastic.
I gotta read this next one. It's from Kevin. Will, just wanted to say that we love the hydrovane and the personal touch and sheer amount of detail you all provided when I inquired about one for prospective boat purchase, which unfortunately did not complete.
Well, we hope your next boat works out.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear that feedback. Thank you.
Jeremy Frett, so how do you finance your cruising? So we have been quite fortunate that we do have this family business, Hydrovane, that allows us to work. Certainly doesn't finance what we do, but it does allow us to kind of have jobs that we can do remotely. We are so we're so amazed that a lot of the people we meet out there have some sort of remote work, you know, or making money somehow.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays you can do it through YouTube channels. You can do it through picking up contract work along the way. There's definitely less of that sort of I need to save for my whole life and then punch out mentality.
I think it's also interesting to note that depending on where you're cruising, like when we're in Mexico, our monthly budget is pretty low. I mean, it was higher this time when we were in Mexico just because we were spending more time in marinas just because it was easier with the twins. But otherwise, you can be living off for, you know, a very, very small budget, which is great.
I think the best words of wisdom that I've heard on that subject is you'll spend whatever you have. You know, if you're living off $500 a month, that's what you'll spend. And if you have 5,000 a month, that's probably what you're going to live up to. So.
A question from Craig. My son Daniel wants to know how it is cruising with a dog. So we have a confession here. So Salty joined us in California, and he was honestly the best cruising dog ever. He was great on passage all the way down California coast. He made us tons of friends on shore. But when the twins were born and when we left San Diego, Salty actually stayed with my parents. It was just a little bit too much for us to manage. So,
but when we're at sea, we have a little AstroTurf pad that he pees on, and
we're really looking forward to bringing him back on board in Mexico. But it was just a little too much for us the last year to do twins and a miniature poodle.
Question from Johan: how do you feel about cats? We love cats.
Oh, Will, I mean, you should point out, Will, when he cruised with his family as a kid, they had a dog and a cat on board.
Yeah, we had a cat and a dog, and I think the cat and the dog, when we arrived in Hawaii, had to be quarantined. No, I don't think, I know. And it actually worked out just fine. They weren't overly mad at us. I think they were mad at us for an hour or two, and then away we went. But in Mexico, cats are totally fine.
And a question from Cristobal: how much offshore experience did you have before the trip? Oh, that's
a good question.
So I had, I mean, no experience whatsoever when we bought our first boat down in Mexico in 2012. So nothing, hardly any sailing experience. So it was really great for me to learn how to sail in Mexico because it's relatively easy, benign sailing, and the water is warm and the weather is nice. Will was far more experienced. He had sailed with his family as a kid and done some other crewing and had a lot more experience. So that did make it easier on us.
I am a very big firm believer that the sailing is actually the easy part of it all. It's more just about adapting to the lifestyle and living in a small space. It's more important. So just get living on a boat and see if it's really for you or not. Johan says, or tries, and now I realize that the question about cats was not about animal cats, it's about multi-hulls. So catamarans and tries. This is a good question. We're constantly talking about our next boat and what it would be. And I have to say, now that we have the two boys, we will probably move to a catamaran, even though I love monohulls. They both have their place, and I'm not totally sold on that, but we obviously are talking about it. I think that with cats and tries, it's just the livability factor and having that much space. The reason why we're not going to a multi-hull right now or for in the next year or two is we just don't use the boat enough because we're doing our commuter cruising style. The boat would sit there for longer periods, but if we go back to the South Pacific or go further afield, I think it is something we'll look at.
It kind of has to do with, well, I'm sure many of you are Canadians, but not leaving the country for more than 6 months right now and with the boys, so.
Yeah. But the other thing with cats and tries, they're not as fast as they say. Once you get loaded up with cruising, they're actually pretty much doing monohull speeds plus a little bit. So it's not exactly what they say in the brochure at all times. But the livability is for sure real. The one thing that I want to figure out if I'm okay with is the motion, because we have been on a few catamarans and we've actually sailed on our friend's Lagoon 52 in Tonga. And we all felt seasick because the motion is very jerky and not natural. So before we commit to something like that, I want to see that we're okay with that.
I like that you've put so much thought into this.
I have. I put a
already.
lot of thought into it.
What is the one thing that you would do differently next time in regards to preparation, and one thing you would do again for sure? Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, differently. Well, we made a huge mistake with our solar on HydroQuest, and we did learn from that mistake. So that was when we outfitted the boat in Mexico and we added solar, but we didn't add enough. So when we got to the Marquesas, our fridge was just running constantly, and we actually had to turn off our fridge and go fridgeless for the entire South Pacific. We just didn't have enough
Power
solar
play,
power to support it. So that's why on KaiQuest we have, I think it's now
440 watts.
440 watts.
I think it really, you end up, a lot of it comes down to just power generation and how you're going to make it comfortable to live on board. For the next boat, I think, we focused on solar this time. I would actually spend more time focusing on refrigeration, making it more efficient, better insulation on the fridge, and try and just reduce our power consumption. Because we work from the boat, so we actually spend a lot of time on our computers, and computers are a big power drain. So when you start factoring in refrigeration, computers, water maker, all these things, you can never have enough power. So I would just try and load up with even more solar, even than what we have now.
And what we would do again, I feel like we did it well. So nothing broke in our entire South Pacific crossing, which is amazing. I think we had one halyard, the spin halyard broke. Yeah, so that was the only breakage that we had. And we really do attribute to the fact that we worked so hard on preparation. The time that we spent in Mexico in 2011 and the early part of 2013, we were just, working on the boat and just thinking everything through. And we were a little bit stressed. And I think that we did something that we're trying to do differently this time is kind of just realize this is all part of the lifestyle and manage our stress a little better. So I don't know if it's working, but we're trying.
That's a hard one.
Okay, I think we only have a few more
3 minutes left.
So let's see. What sort of radio equipment did we have? So for the South Pacific crossing, we had, of course, a VHF, and then the week before we left Banderas Bay, we were talking to people and they were like, oh, you must have a single sideband radio. So we ended up piecing this SSB together, some used components from someone, and we weren't keen on buying one new, and it was great. It worked for the first 3 days and then it broke, but we could actually listen in on the net, but we couldn't transmit, and it was nice to kind of half participate in the net, but I don't think it's something that I would spend my money on.
Becoming less and less common. I think people are just relying on satellite, and that's just the way that it's trending. So
we really, we just have a sat phone on KaiQuest, and we don't really have any intentions of ever installing an SSB.
What does it cost to live on a sailboat? I think we kind of covered that, and like I said, a lot of it just comes down to whatever your budget is, and you're just going to make it work.
And anchor, we have a Rockna. Yeah. I think
good anchor. All the next generation anchors are pretty solid. We had a Manson on the last boat, and that was also great.
And in Mexico you need a stern anchor, so we also have a Mantis. As our stern anchor, which was great. And we're happy to answer other questions. If you want to email us or on Instagram, just send us a message. It's Hydrovane. So I think we're running out of time. I'm not sure if we're going to be cut off or.
No, I'm going to close out, but thank you, Will and Sarah. That was an amazing presentation. And thank you for joining us today. You can see Will and Sarah again on Friday, same time. So also, if you can give us your feedback on either this seminar or if you have ideas on topics that you would like us to cover in the future, simply click on the Evaluate tab located just above the seminar description and complete the form. After the show, all attendees will also receive a post-show survey. So be sure to check out all the features at the Vancouver International Boat Show Virtual. If you have a question, you can check out the info booth. So have a great time at the boat show, and thank you again. Bye for now.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.